Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Call Centre and Customer Management Expo Live and to our second live conference session of the day, this time on cloud computing and what it means for the call centre of the future. I'm Claudia Hathaway, editor of Call Centre Focus, and I'll be hosting all of today's webinars, so thank you for joining us. Now, we do want this session to be as interactive as possible, so please do ask any questions you may have as we go along. Now, you can do this simply by clicking into the questions box at the bottom left-hand side of your screen. You just type your question in the box provided and then click the Submit Question button. So let's just give that a go now if we can. So if everyone listening would just like to enter in the questions box where you're logging in from today, just type your location in the box and click Send. And then I'll be able to see where everyone is dialing in from. Okay, so we've got Tom from Leicester, David from London, Dawn from Wolverhampton, Caroline from Derbyshire. Great, that's fantastic. Looks like everyone has got the hang of that. So let's get started with today's session. Now, we all hear lots about cloud technology in today's business environment, but what exactly does that mean for the communication between company and consumer? Now, if we can, I just want to do a quick poll before I introduce you to our expert speaker today, just to get an idea of what your understanding is of a cloud-based contact center. So if you just want to click in one of those areas, which one best describes your attitude to this. So either you have a pretty good idea what it is and how it can benefit your business, you know what it is, but you're skeptical that it can deliver any benefits, or you're not sure what the benefits are, or you just really don't know how it works. So just click into one of those options and click Submit. Just give you a couple of seconds to do that, and then let's have a look at the results. Okay, so pretty mixed. So we've got a sort of 50-50 split really between those of you who kind of understand it and know what the benefits are, and then the rest of you kind of don't really understand what it can do for your business. Okay, well, on hand to help us with that, we have Dr Nicola Millard, who is a customer experience futurologist with BT. She uses a combination of psychology and futurology to try and anticipate what might be around the corner for both consumers and organisations. Nicola loves to challenge conventional business thinking, and she spends most of her time doing research, writing blogs, articles and white papers, and also travelling the world to present at conferences and run workshops. So a busy lady. So Nicola, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Claudia. How are you?
I'm good.
Good.
So over to you.
Hello, everybody. And I know, because I am a futurologist, probably what the first question is in your mind, which is, what on earth is a futurologist and why does BT have one? And I keep saying, well, I do have a crystal ball, but it doesn't work, unfortunately. So I do have to work slightly harder for my living than staring at tea leaves or crystal balls. I probably have one of the most fun jobs in BT, to be perfectly honest. And my job is to really take a lot of the sort of innovation and research that we have across what we call the innovation ecosystem in BT. So that's anything from our own research and development organisation, and I'm actually today I am at Adastral Park, which is our main research and development facility, with a lot of people that are really inventing the future around me. But equally, we have partners around the world as well, and we typically do work with organisations like Cambridge University, University College London, but equally over in China we've got some relationships with Shanghai University. We're doing some work with Melbourne, one of the universities in Melbourne at the moment, and one of our main universities is Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Well, that's all well and good. My job actually is actually met another futurologist about 2 months ago whose job title was Trend DJ, which is, firstly, I have job title envy because I think that's a very, very cool title, but actually it kind of describes what we do very, very accurately, which is looking around at trends and then trying to bring them together in a mix that actually means something for business. And that's pretty much what a futurologist does. So I get to talk to a lot of people around the world looking at trends and then bring that back to a very pragmatic, well, what does it mean for us, particularly in the contact center industry? And really what I'm going to do today is to talk you through a lot of the research that we've recently done, which we've called Clouds, Crowds and Autonomous Customers. And this is really looking at all the trends that are starting to hit us in the contact center industry. Now, for those of you who maybe have tuned in for a highly technical presentation on cloud, I'm not going to give you that, but certainly if you wait till the end, my colleagues Natasha and Emily are going to be taking you through an actual cloud-based contact center, and you can see how that works. I'm not going to do that in this session. I'm really going to start to outline some of the trends that are coming through very strongly in terms of how we're changing as customers, and actually how customers are using cloud very, very effectively to actually pretty much govern their choice, how they buy, how they consume. All that kind of stuff is being driven by cloud. We've got lots of devices that are driven by cloud as well. So we've got things like tablet computing and smartphones. Cloud and those devices go together very well. We've also got crowds, so we've got social media, social networking. That's also an opportunity and a challenge in terms of how we manage customer service and customer contact. All this kind of adds up to what we call service as unusual, business as unusual indeed. And this kind of business as unusual is the era we're in at the moment. No one can say this is normal, but business as unusual actually started before hard times, before the recession hit, before tough economies started to really become top of our consciousness. It started actually as the internet gained sort of critical mass amongst customers, because the internet's given us one big thing, and it's access to information. And access to information gives us access to an immense amount of choice as well, and whether that's comparing products and services, but also comparing things like opinions. So what I'm going to do today is talk you through some of the stuff that we've done, particularly looking at how customer behavior is changing, but then sort of reflect that back and say, well, how does the contact center actually need to change in order to combat this autonomous customer? So, customers are changing, and I kind of talk about them in the abstract, but they're not. They're us. We are changing as customers. And partially that is because we have access to a lot more choice than we've ever had before. And the internet it provides radical transparency. You can't hide on the internet anymore. So actually what we found was, we asked customers as part of the Autonomous Customer Survey, which was done with customers in both the US and the UK. We asked them, how's your life changing? And interestingly enough, I remember futurologists about 15 years ago were talking about the fact that we'd probably be working a 3-day week by now, because technology will have taken away all the boring stuff, all the grindy stuff from us, and we'd be sitting by the pool sipping cocktails. Well, unfortunately, sometimes futurologists are wrong. I know it's shocking, but it's true. What we've actually found is technology, it has taken away a lot of the boring stuff, but it's actually also concentrated our lives. So we get a number of things coming from customers. They've actually turned into shopper swats, we call them. So they're doing their homework before they're purchasing things, and actually they're taking advice. They're advice seeking a lot, and actually that's kind of a very natural human reaction to choice. I keep saying that there is one very critical piece of software that has not been updated recently. It is unfortunately my brain. My brain is not evolving along the lines of the microchip, in that I'm not becoming more intelligent year on year, unfortunately. My short-term memory capacity is not increasing year on year. Again, I think it's in terminal decline at the moment. So I'm faced with a huge amount of choice, and the natural human reaction to choice is to seek advice to cut down the choice and make sure that the choices I make are the right choices for me. And we're increasingly doing that, not just on risky purchases, on purchases we're not sure about, because we're very, very aware of value for money at the moment. So we're not going to waste money. We need to make sure that we make the right choice. So we're getting the picture of basically a customer that is very much doing their homework before they actually even remotely touch a company. 46% of them are actually saying they're no longer loyal to any one company as well, and that's quite interesting. In fact, there's been a big debate around whether loyalty is dead. I'm not entirely sure it is, and there's a different type of loyalty starting to emerge as well. We're getting this statistic saying that 83% of customers are buying more from companies that make it easier for them to buy, make it easy for them to do business with. Well, actually, if you think about that, 83% of customers are coming back if you make it easy. That's loyalty. And certainly if you're looking at some of the academic studies coming out of the US at the moment, what we're finding is a very much higher correlation between ease of use, customer effort, and loyalty than customer satisfaction and loyalty. And as a result, we're starting to even get a shift in the kind of measures that companies are starting to use. So you're starting to see customer effort score come onto companies' balanced scorecards now, simply because they realize that customers will come if they make it easy. So that's the customer that we're seeing, an autonomous customer that's seeking advice in a very different way. Actually, the autonomous customer is a very big piece of research. I'm not going to go through it all. We do not have time today. It's an 80-slide slide set. But basically, the top line is we are finding very much the better access to information is driving this shopper SWOT behavior. We actually find that people are increasingly accepting of things like self-service. There are two reasons for that. One is it puts them in control. And the other one is because no one actually tries to sell you anything on self-service. And I think actually that's a lesson to be learned as we're designing both web and voice self-service. We need to make sure that the customer feels as if they are in control, and let's try not to sell them anything, and particularly don't try and sell them anything that's inappropriate, because they won't like it. Customers are helping other customers, and this is weird behavior that we'll examine towards the back of the presentation, and that's being fueled by social media and social networking. We are becoming supercharged by our smartphones, and that's the scary bit of the research, and I will be going into that immediately after this slide, so I won't dwell on it. And as I said, loyalty seems to be declining, but if you make it easy for customers, they will come back. So that's the picture that we're getting with customers. Let's go into a little bit of the scary bit. I keep saying part of my job is to scare people. I start by scaring myself. And actually, one of the things that scared us when we started to break down the autonomous customer data was that smartphone users were behaving somewhat strangely. Now, at the moment in the UK, certainly across Europe, smartphone usage is not quite 50%. It's getting there. It will probably eclipse 50% this year. So we have kind of got prototype mainstream customer behavior coming online with these devices. And I keep saying these devices are incredible, and certainly if you can see the graphic there, that's the kind of device we may well expect in 2013. The good news for people like me with exceedingly bad eyesight is that the screens will be getting bigger. We'll get flexible screens, projected screens. That's great for actually seeing the information, but of course these devices have other capabilities as well, and the critical one is around the fact that they know where you are. Now, Google, I was with Google a couple of weeks ago, and they were saying that 52% of searches on a smartphone on Google are to do with the basically where you are, your location. So we're getting very location-based behavior being driven by these smartphones. We've also got all sorts of things that we can do with smartphones, so whether it be geofencing, geolocation, all of the sort of near-field communication type devices that are starting to turn these kind of devices into our wallets. So cashless payments, all that kind of stuff is enabled through the kind of capabilities of this mobile device. Now that's about the technology, and I kept saying, cloud fuels a lot of this because the smartphone is going into the cloud to get the content. But let's look at the behaviors of people with smartphones. Now, I know that I do a lot of observation, And I know when people are in maybe a bank branch or a retail store, so they might be scanning barcodes, certainly, and comparing prices online and offline. If you're in a queue, which often we spend most of our life in queues in a physical space, quite often you see people fiddling with their smartphones, and actually what they're probably doing is looking up the answers to all the questions that they were probably originally going to ask by the time they get to the front of the queue. Now, of course, by the time they get to the front of the queue, they've got quite complex questions frequently, and they are very, very liable to be looking at their phone, looking at the frontline person, and then waving the phone at the frontline person and saying, you know, that's not what's on your website. Challenging customers to deal with. And for the front line, they've got to try and meet the challenge, because they are faced with super SWAT customers who are becoming supercharged by the technology that they got. So how do we help the front line, whether it be on a physical space or indeed in a contact center? Because one of the weird things we found with smartphone users in this space was they're actually using all channels more. So actually these customers are calling the contact center more. We didn't necessarily think that that was a behavior that would come out, but absolutely they are contacting the contact center more. But of course, it's not the first contact they have. They Google, they use an app. They're getting information. So by the time they hit the contact center, they're really quite informed. So we've got a big challenge here. Actually, they're using all channels more as well. So they're using the website more. They're using the contact center more. They may even be using the physical space more. But because they are using all channels more, they spot the inconsistencies more frequently. So my current favorite is real-time applications, particularly travel ones. So your smartphone says that your train has arrived, but it must be a very small train because you can't see it. And of course the natural reaction is to go and grab a customer service person, wave your phone at them and go, the train's supposed to be here, where is it? So that's very classic smartphone behavior. But it's a big challenge for organizations in terms of their customer experience design, because of course the website apps need to be designed so that you've got maybe a direct button into the contact center. So build an app, but equally, rather than have an app which does not have a phone number on it, these customers often want to ring and ask more detailed questions. So we're starting to see apps having contact center buttons, contact us, so they can go straight through to the contact center and ask all those difficult questions that they want to ask. We're also getting some weird location-based behaviors out of these guys as well. As I said, again, the connectivity and the cloud capabilities of these devices mean that we're getting some weird behaviors too. So particularly things like Foursquare. You may be a Foursquare user. Some of the listeners, I suspect, will be. Foursquare especially is a weird one because it basically allows you to check into a location that you're in. If you check into that location, so it may be McDonald's, it might be Starbucks, it might be the local town hall, it might be a bank branch, but if you check into that location, you earn points. And of course, if you earn more points than anyone else in that location, you become temporarily mayor of that location. Now, that's why I said it's interesting. Is loyalty dead? That could be construed as loyalty behavior. Now, I think it is, because you're basically connecting with your friends, so this links both mobile and context-based applications with social network capability. So on Foursquare, you're checking into a location and telling your friends that you are there. Is that loyalty? Now, interestingly enough, this is an opportunity for businesses. So if they can start to detect that there's a lot of activity, so that people are leaving data saying, I am the mayor of this Starbucks branch, actually, if you mine that data, it's quite valuable. If you can see the slide, actually one of the main beneficiaries of this, oddly enough, are pubs. A publican, I've talked to a number of publicans recently, they've started to mine the data on Foursquare, so they can actually find their Foursquare mayors, and they can offer them offers. But again, how do you do that across all channels? Because these guys are using all channels. So how do you start to recognize that you have potentially a loyal customer who is a mayor of one of your locations actually calling into your contact center? So again, lots of threats, lots of opportunities, and some very, very strange behaviors coming out of the smartphone sort of universe and the smartphone, that supercharged smartphone customer. However, the rest of us are behaving very differently as well. So online customers are seeking advice in a very different way. actually what we're finding is that they start online. So if we have a problem or we're maybe thinking about buying something, we don't ring the organisation first. We Google, we Bing, we use a search engine. So we go online, we do our research, we compare and contrast, and hope any sort of search, maybe Google, some of the stuff that comes up on Google in the top 5, top 10 search criteria will hopefully be your website, your official website. But a lot of it's not. A lot of it's social opinion, user-generated content, and you can't control that kind of thing. So what we're finding is people are trying to self-serve. They're going online, they're doing their homework, they're comparing, they're contrasting, they're hopefully maybe going right the way through. They're never touching you at all. But if they need help or advice, they then drop into very, very traditional channels. So they either lift the phone, get the contact centre, or they go face-to-face in store to ask those complex questions. And basically what we're finding is that 56% of customers who are online are agreeing that their calls are now more complex than they used to be. We do also know there was a piece of research that came out last week that about 30% of people, when they call the contact centre, are actually also online. So again, the website is right in front of them. And again, that's got a huge challenge. So the contact centre, because you've got a hyper-informed customer who has the website in front of them. And again, they'll start to question. They don't want just what's on the FAQs. They want over and above complex stuff, emotive stuff. And that places a lot of pressure on that traditional contact centre environment, which is why there's an opportunity here to think very differently about the contact centre, and certainly cloud-based contact centres. It's a very different prospect to a normal big building full of, lines of desks and people taking calls. That's a very outmoded, I think, contact center model. And it's a model that tends to be stuck in almost a core processing factory model. The cartoon here basically kind of sums up this box processing model that we've sat in for a number of years. And frequently what we're finding with business as unusual is we're stuck in models that have been around for maybe 20, 30 years or more. And actually call centers started to emerge maybe mid-80s, early 90s, and we're using a very similar model than we used to. But customers have changed fundamentally because they've become shopper swaps. They're much more involved. They're using more channels. So the thing with the contact center is that you tend to get this call factory, and all the boxes look the same when they're in the queue. And actually, they used to be quite transactional. So what actually those calls did, they were all very similar, maybe 10 years ago. But now, although the calls look the same, the contents of those boxes are very different. So you might be lucky and get a lovely smiling cat. That's kind of a customer that needs reassurance. Often we can get a bit paranoid, are we doing the right thing? Am I going to get this by the date that I need it? They're calling in because of a nice problem, if you like. They're easy to deal with. But the majority, I have to say, of customers that come through, by the time they get through to the contact centre, are generally very large monkeys with baseball bats. These are angry, these are frustrated customers who often have very complex emotive problems. And they break call handle time. And I've always questioned average call handle time as a valid measure for anything other than staffing. It should never be put on a frontline advisor. Thank goodness it's starting to become a slightly less trendy measure now. But, you can't control who's coming in. And the poor advisors are also assumed to be working optimally all the time in this model. And the guy in the centre of that photo has just been walloped several times by a very large monkey with a bat. Not going to be working particularly optimally. So these guys have got an even more complex job than they've ever had before. They have a big challenge with the customers that are coming through by the time they get to the contact centre. Is the model fit for purpose? And actually the answer is probably not. So we do need to think quite radically, I think, in the contact centre space as to how we can actually meet the customer demand that's coming in with an appropriate model. Now, of course, the other thing that complicates matters is that customers are turning to other channels to actually contact centres. So we did ask, as part of the autonomous customer research, what channels do you expect to be using in the future to contact organisations? So in other words, the customers have done their homework, they've become the shopper swap. After that point, they decide they're going to actually contact the organisation. What channel do they want to use? And actually, we didn't get particularly futuristic answers. We got phone call, email, internet, face-to-face as the top 4. Even post is still on the graph. Now, it's interesting that these are trusted channels to customer at the moment. So we've got phone call. There was a piece of research that came out about 3 weeks ago from the US that said the phone is one of the most trusted communication channels. Now, for BT, that's a lovely result. So we don't mind that kind of thing, but that's reflected in this data as well, in that we trust the phone channel. However, we do have a very interesting customer starting to emerge. We call them the millennials. They're also known maybe as teenagers. They are displaying some strange communication behaviours, and my standard joke is that when I was 14, which was a very long time ago, I used to get sent to my bedroom when I was naughty. Now, you no longer do that because, of course, that's exactly where they want to be. The ultimate punishment now for a teenager is disconnection. So you take away the mobile phone, take away the internet connection. All their friends think they are dead. Now, you start to ask that customer, what channels do you want to actually contact an organisation on? They will go email. That's so last year. They basically don't use email. In fact, the only reason they have email at all is usually you can't sign up to Facebook without an email address. So they get an email address, but they don't use it to communicate. So forget email with that particular cohort. If we go down the graph, we can start to see these new channels coming along. And certainly web chat is one of the ones that's the up and coming channel at the moment. There are 2 reasons for it, really. Firstly, it's quite popular with customers because they start online. So rather than going to find a phone and a phone number, they can click a button and get through to an informed person. They are quite happy to do so. But there's also pull from the organisation because, of course, web chat can be very efficient as a channel because you can have one advisor on maybe 3 to 4 web chats simultaneously. I have seen up to 10. There was one centre in the US that we went to see where they had 10 simultaneous web chats per advisor. I think that's, given the limitations of our brain, I think that's probably a little bit too much. So web chat, I think, is a real promising channel, and certainly from evidence working with customers across the board, as I tend to, and around the world as we tend to as well, we're seeing web chat grow across all markets. Interestingly enough, social media is only selected by 10% of people as a primary communication channel for use in the future with organisations. It's interesting, the hype on social media at the moment, you might expect that figure to be higher, but it's not. And actually our theory at the moment is that potentially social media isn't a primary contact channel, it's a secondary one. So in other words, we try ringing the contact centre, we try going through the website, it all goes wrong. And at that point, we go onto Twitter and we start to rave. And I always say there are 3 things we do on social media: rant, rave, and recommend. So we tend to rant and rave a bit if things go wrong. So we're actually looking at doing some research to actually put some stats behind that. But that seems to be what this data is telling us, that it's not a primary channel, it's a secondary channel. I will touch on later on how maybe sometimes social media is a slightly skewed channel in terms of influence. So it's not a channel you should forget by any means, but if you get the primary channels right, the chances are that social media won't be such a problem. So, the challenge for the contact centre. This actually is my oldest slide. I've had this slide for about 7 years now, and it's got prettier as the years have gone by. But actually, the challenge here is largely not a technological one. We have been able to program in or plug in pretty much any channel to the contact center we can think of. The challenge is much more around the box processing model. So how do you actually get these guys get the processes to support a channel agnostic thing, because average handle time here is non-existent. So we can't see an average handle time across all these media. It challenges measures. It challenges processes, and certainly the measures that we're starting to see emerging as contact centres go a lot more multi-channel are things like right first time. So that's a good measure because it's a customer measure. Did the customer have to call in? But did the customer have to call in twice about the same problem? But it's not specific to any media, and it should be monitored across media as well. So it's not just did they phone twice, it's also did they phone, did they email, did they IM, did they text? So how do we start to tie that all up and make sure that we get it right first time for the customer, regardless of the channel that they contact on? Skill sets for advisors can be very different as well. So talking on the phone can be a very different skill to maybe doing an instant messaging session or maybe doing text, because one is quite a formal medium. Instant messaging, social media are very informal. So there's a very different language that's often used there. You can't sign off regards on a social media session or instant messaging indeed, but you might on email. So there are training implications and familiarity implications with who you employ in the contact center as well. But it's not technology that's holding us back in this environment. And in fact, technology gives us an opportunity because, again, as things start to go into the cloud, this mystical thing called the cloud, we actually have the opportunity to locate the capabilities in the cloud rather than actually in a physical switch. So we've got all sorts of opportunities for rethinking the contact center here. The other thing that I've never really understood with contact centers, and I've been doing contact center work for about 20 years now. I obviously started when I was 6, but one of the things I've never understood is I can walk into a contact center manager's office and basically say, how many calls did you take today? And they'll tell me. How long were those calls? They can tell me that too. What were those calls about? I get a big silence and a blank look. And to me, surely that is the most important thing with a contact center. It's actually figuring out why people are calling you and actually maybe modifying the way that you're delivering customer experience as a result. Now, the opportunity with things like analytics now is that you can start to get a handle on why customers are calling. What's the bulk of calls about? Where are problems going on? What's happening with products and services? And organizations are starting to realize that the contact center is often the first place that you hear about these things. So strategically, it's getting very important to do. So, firstly, as Benny Hill says, just because no one complains does not mean all parachutes are perfect. Think about it. Firstly, listen to customers. Figure out why they're calling. Figure out where they're having problems. Figure out what isn't working, what is working. Listen to employees on the front line as well. We don't do that enough, and often they are the first people that start to know about a problem. So rather than just taking call after call after call, do we get the opportunity to say to them, what's going on today? What are the problems that customers are having? How can we solve those problems? And actually by listening to them and then maybe doing something about it, we get a much more motivated and committed workforce for a start. Then the difficult bit is how do you start to evolve systems and processes in customer time rather than corporate time, because customers are largely moving a lot faster than the organizations that serve them. So how do we start to pay attention to this and shift stuff fast? And certainly if you hear our CEO in Livingston talk, he's obsessed with agility because we used to move very slowly. We're a big organization. Now we go down to from 10-year development cycles to things like 90-day development cycles, 30-day development cycles, 1-week sprints involving customers and frontline employees into the design process, so that at least we can start to move in customer time rather than corporate time. But again, it's a different model. It's very much around understanding what the demand is into the contact center, using the technologies, clever technologies that can actually help you to figure that out, and also harnessing the knowledge that's in your employees' heads as well, because we don't do that enough. We have a lot of human capital in the front line, and we don't ask them enough what's going right and what's going wrong. However, none of that was futuristic. There are certainly elements of cloud there, and I think as consumers we're slightly more comfortable with cloud than organizations are, because we're using a lot in the cloud. Facebook, Yahoo, all of those, they're in the cloud. Now the networked expert model is what we think the business cloud model, if you like, is for contact centers. The notion of networked expertise is if you get customers who are more informed and more expert coming in with more difficult questions, who actually solves those problems? Who tackles those real difficult, complex questions? And the answer to that question is experts do. Who are experts, though? Where are they? Well, actually, they might sit in a traditional contact center. That's true, but they might be in the field. They might sit in head office. They might sit at home. Actually, they could be anywhere. It doesn't really matter. So again, what we're doing in the whole cloud space is very much virtualizing things out. You don't need a switch anymore. If you look at the history of the contact center, there were two reasons it developed as a sort of big warehouse. One was you needed a big switch to put into the warehouse, and then you'd surround the switch with people hanging off it. You don't need that anymore. You don't actually need a physical switch at all. You can put the switch in the cloud. Therefore, you do not need a big room to locate that switch in. You also don't necessarily need a big warehouse of people, and we know any of the big contact centres in major cities, they're quite difficult to recruit for. So how do you get the right people? So if you can put the people in the cloud as well, and there's a notion at the moment called the human cloud. So how do you get the knowledge in human beings' heads, wherever that person is? How do you get that knowledge to solve complex customer problems? And by the way, they could be anywhere in the world as well. We don't need to be confined by national boundaries in this model at all. Again, that's fueled by things like cloud, because you're virtualizing the whole thing. So networked expert needs, three things. Firstly, you need to know who your experts are. And in big organizations, that can be quite difficult, because they could be anyone and they could be anywhere. But once you've worked out who your experts are, you need to then pretty much figure out whether they are around. So you need to start to embed things like presence information into this model. So once you've found the expert, are they on holiday? Are they actually around to talk to customers now? When can you build the expectations they might actually be able to get back to customers? So presence information is really important. Then you need what I call speed dating. So you need to speed date the customer with the right expert to solve that problem. That's skills-based routing on acid, really, and that's also media agnostic. It doesn't matter which channel they come in on. They just respond on an appropriate channel. So you just get the right expert to solve the problem and speed date them with the customer. The kind of ultimate result of this could be chaos, because theoretically anyone could be talking to anyone in this model. And you do need some accountability, and you do need to be able to measure things, because of course measuring things means you can manage things. So we need to embed in this system really, really good CRM and really good workflow management, so we know who's talked to who, when, and what happens. And also maybe embed presence information into an end-to-end service chain, because of course most of us are sometimes dependent on partners to deliver service as well. There's a whole chain of people across the end-to-end service delivery chain, and they're all potentially networked experts. Now that might sound fairly futuristic, but we are seeing this model start to emerge now. Certainly in financial institutions, certainly in IT, because both finance and IT are suffering extremes of complexity at the moment. So networked expert becomes incredibly relevant in that space. But as I said, cloud starts to make this slightly easier model to implement. The other thing we asked customers in the autonomous customer was about networked expertise. So they actually agreed that they don't mind being transferred to another person who's trained to answer more complicated questions, as long as they can answer those complicated questions. And the feedback we generally get about contact centres is that we get lovely people, but they can't do anything for us. So how do we get lovely people that can do something for us? And again, the emphasis is on that person. So we are getting a good experience with the contact center agent. It impacts very positively on my loyalty. Now that's partially because often it makes it easy for you to solve your problem. So if you can get through to the right person, first time preferably, who can actually solve their problem, customers are very happy. So this model does seem to tick all the boxes for customers. How do you do it, though? Certainly one of the things, certainly BT, for a start, has looked at the call profile that we're getting. We're getting a lot more complexity in. And we actually went back to a very old idea in our strategy, in that we decided we were going to recruit home-based advisors in the cloud, because actually, to be a cloud-based advisor, all you really need is a phone line and a browser, and that you can become part of the switch, part of the cloud, part of the human cloud of networked expertise. Now, the intriguing thing about this is that you tend to get a very different type of expert or advisor coming in, and certainly you can see three very typical examples on this slide of the kind of advisor you tend to get. So firstly, returning mum. We've got Martine. She doesn't want to do 9 to 5, typically, Martine, because she has to manage the household, she has to manage the kids. So she doesn't want to work in a centralized contact center. She doesn't want to work 9 to 5. The advantage with Martine that we get is that she can work pretty anti-social hours. So she can work maybe 4 hours in the morning, 4 hours in the evening. Potentially, if she's around and we have a sudden call spike, we get this I just blogged about the phenomena called the micro worker, that you can start to call these guys in for 15-minute shifts. Sometimes if there's a demand for their expertise, if there's a sudden demand on the contact center, you can start to bring these guys in if they're available for short shifts, and obviously you pay them for it. But if they're there and they're available, you can start to access the information. And Martine's a very experienced customer service person, so she's invaluable to bring in. Katie doesn't want to commute. Katie's commute in the morning involves putting fluffy slippers on and walking across a corridor. The advantage we get with Katie, she is a 9 to 5er, so she works typical hours, but the advantage with Katie is that she doesn't go off sick. And, you know, if you're not feeling 100% in the morning, frequently you don't bother to get in the car and drive to work. Well, her commute just involves crossing a corridor, so she's more likely to go into work. The other thing is that Katie is not affected by things like snow or volcanic ash clouds or anything like that. So we get a tremendous advantage in that she doesn't have to commute. And again, her advantage is she doesn't have to pay for petrol. I think actually Katie's quite driven by green agenda as well, so she doesn't really want to go out of the house and pollute and things like that. So Katie has a very flexible lifestyle as well, but she just does not go off sick. Anthony, ex-engineer. Wonderful knowledge in his head. He's semi-retired, so again he works split shifts, so 4 hours in the morning, 4 hours in the evening. We actually need less engineers in BT than we've ever had before because our network is more reliable. I am told by our CEO that there's on average one fault every 17 years. So we've got that kind of capability in our organisation and we don't want to lose it. So Anthony goes on the phones, he does complex diagnostics. So again, he works split shifts. We get an incredible advantage of actually keeping his skill set, but actually supporting his work-life balance. So again, all these are contact center advisors in the cloud. Actually, the business case for a lot of these guys, and we've seen this across a lot of implementations where home-based advisors are and where sort of very flexible advisors are brought in, that we get an incredible hike in productivity from them. So on average, about 22% hike in productivity compared to fixed contact center advisors. The reasons? They don't go off sick. If snow comes, they're kind of invincible. There's a bit of sort of business continuity really built into this as well. And you get a very different type of expert as well. Definitely an networked expert in the cloud. So we're starting to see that come along. That's actually very usual in the US now. Contact centers seem to have gone very much into the virtual space, powered by cloud. It's starting to happen in the UK and across Europe as well. So the technology is there, but customers are doing even weirder stuff. So, social networking. You knew I'd get to it. Every session at the moment has to have something about social networking in. And I just want to dwell on the fact that customers are using the cloud of a social network, the human expertise in social networks, i.e. people that seem a bit like them, to take advice. So they're using that as part of the advice-seeking process. 83% are using reviews of products and services on the internet to check the quality of them. And you cannot control those reviews. In fact, a guy at a conference I was at about 4 months ago put it really well, and I wish I could remember his name because I love to attribute this to him. But he said, in social media, you cannot control the dance floor, but you can go and dance. And there are two things you can do. You can go lurk on the side of the dance floor, and that's really trying to suss out, what dancing's going on, who's on the dance floor, what are they doing. And then once you've sussed that out, you can go in and boogie, maybe, select your partner, see what kind of dance you want to do with them. And I think that's a really good analogy of this space. So there are lots of opportunities here in that customers are completely bypassing you. I keep calling it corporate jiu-jitsu. How do you use the momentum that customers have actually generated and just get out of the way and let them help each other? In fact, we know particularly forums are very popular. Certainly amongst sort of technical communities, forums are very popular, but it's not just technical. There is indeed one on Muesli. No idea why you would want to talk about Muesli. I guess whatever floats your raisin. But there are pretty much communities about everything going on at the moment. And there are starting to be very different business models based around this. And giffgaff is a prime example of that. It's an O2 company. They have no customer support. If you buy up to giffgaff, basically part of that promise is that you have a forum where customers talk to other customers about problems, and they solve each other's problems. And in return of very low tariffs, because they have no support costs, so you get the benefit of a low tariff without having to call a contact center. You just go onto a forum, and hopefully other customers have solutions to the problems that you're having. They do their marketing that way as well, giffgaff. So very interesting organisation. Wouldn't apply to every sector, but certainly it's a very innovative way of using the social space. Actually, BT has been doing social networking activities in the customer service space for about 3.5, 4 years now, really provoked by some of the power that this stuff has got. And certainly we do a mixture of things that we do control some of the dance floor, so we at least host the dance floor on our forums. The behaviours are somewhat strange sometimes, and we've got this one guy, a fantastic guy, I Am Jolly, who has given us 76 days of free consultancy, effectively, on our forums, solving other customers' problems. For no apparent financial reward, he just loves doing it. And again, he's a really loyal customer. Again, loyalty behaviour going on. So once we noticed he was doing this, we've actually incorporated him into our beta testing community. So he gets new products and services, he gets to test them. YouTube is an interesting one because we know that particularly younger customers tend to go to YouTube rather than read manuals or blogs or pretty much anything, actually. They like the visual aspect of it. I was actually at a conference the other day with Best Buy, and they've just built a TV studio in their contact center. And I'm kind of, that's brilliant thinking, because of course the contact center starts to figure out that there are problems coming in with a particular product and service. They take a couple of advisors offline, put them in the TV studio, do a film about how to solve those problems, and within minutes they can have that up on YouTube and running. So again, using the power of the cloud. YouTube is not something they own, but they can start to post videos on there, and that can act as a deflection mechanism because that's now searchable. And as we know, people search on Google and things like that for advice, so it's visible to that sort of shopper swap customer. And for sure, we're seeing an echo in consumer behavior in the business space as well. I keep saying CEOs still Google, they still read blogs. So actually in the business space as well, we're doing a lot with BT Viewpoint, which is our social platform for business. But the interesting thing about social is it's got the word social in it. It's not broadcast. This is about dialogue, and there's nothing worse. And there's been a fairly damning report by eConsulting in the past month saying that a lot of organizations are all too eager in broadcasting how wonderful they are, but that when a customer becomes engaged enough that they ask a question or maybe want some advice, they never reply. And I keep saying that's like being at a party with somebody who's showing off and seems very interesting, and you go up and listen to them, and then you ask them a question and they walk off. It's rude behavior, and that's because we haven't quite, this is early days for social media, we haven't got quite used to the fact that this is a dialogue, not a broadcast. But again, that has got an incredible opportunity to get into the contact center, because the contact center should be about dialogue. And certainly some of the stuff that hit the press recently about BT being proactive on social media has got the contact center very much at the heart of it. So for example, Twitter. It's a weird mechanism, Twitter. It's very fast. It's also the top 1% of Twitter users who are highly influential are not your normal customer. They are famous. They have over 1 million followers, so they're typically pop stars, actors, personalities. If they're tweeting about you, about your brand, you do have a problem, because again, this is searchable and it's enduring. So you do need to know who is talking about you in this space. And fortunately in BT, we used our innovation capability very, very well here, in that some of the guys working on experts in intelligent systems said that we've got a tool that could potentially help us to sort through this whole, it's like sticking your head in a fire hose, this channel. So there's too much of it to handle. So you actually need to use technology to help you to handle it. The tool's called DebateScape. We still do use it in BT internally to help us to sort through that fire hose of information. And what it does is it spots keywords, it spots contexts, it spots positivity and negativity, and it looks at how viral things are getting as well. And not just on Twitter, but on Facebook, on forums. It then aggregates all that, and there are lots of things that basically pull that all together and try and make sense of it. But the key that we found with DebateScape is to actually network experts together. So don't just spot it, but actually get it through to somebody that can do something about it. And typically that kind of person does sit in the network of expertise that is currently the remit of the contact centre. So with us, what happens is that agents who are networked experts will typically have a queue which monitors social media content. And in certain circumstances, we need to react relatively fast. So certainly we've had Lily Allen tweeting about us. We've had Alan Sugar tweeting about us. In fact, I think he did threaten to kill our CEO on Twitter. And that circumstance, you need to network quite fast with the right expert that can deal with that problem. And sometimes you do need to involve the ultimate networked expert. In the cases of the more famous, more influential 1% of the Twitterati, and that may well be the CEO's office. So the CEO may get involved, but we don't do that all the time. For the 99% of the rest of us who maybe aren't quite so influential, it will be a decision by the contact centre person as to whether we should get involved, and certainly people are allowed an opinion. We have no super injunctions relating to BT at the moment, so they're allowed to have an opinion, but if it's something that we think we can help with, we'll just drop a tweet back going, can we help? And generally we'll take the customer, we'll give an email to the customer or give them a link to something that might help them. But if we want to actually create conversation, we probably want to do it in private rather than in a public space. And I keep saying Twitter's a bit like standing in a pub with a loud hailer. So take it into the public space, verify who the customer is, check their records, and hopefully solve their problem. And the benefits for us, well, basically you can see some of the tweets here that come back from customers about the fact that we have solved their problem. And if all support was as simple, efficient and helpful as that BT Care, I wouldn't have a single grey hair on my head, one quote. And we had one, I think, last week, which was BT equals brilliant tweeting. So, you know, that's great for brand, but also it makes it easier for customers sometimes, particularly if they have had significant problems, and hopefully we can sort them out. But again, it's a challenge for the contact centre. It's a different model for the contact centre, a different channel. But it makes sense that the contact centre should be absolutely the hub of this, because they are dealing with customer problems day in, day out. So that's pretty much a canter through clouds, crowds and autonomous customers. We are behaving slightly different as customers. So there are a number of challenges that we as customers are placing on traditional contact centres. And actually sometimes it needs to be the opportunity to rethink the contact centre. Maybe move it into the cloud. Maybe make it a bit more flexible. Maybe look at networking experts. If you do want to see a cloud-based contact centre in action, do stay on after this session, and Natasha and Emily will be giving you a guided tour. They are going to be around all day, so if you do want to drop by the BT booth, we can actually show you an example of a cloud-based contact centre and how you can maybe get one working, get that flexibility and expertise in there. By all means, if you do want any more information, please do drop past BT Viewpoint. We're blogging on a daily basis about all sorts of stuff. By all means, drop me a line if you want any more information about the research. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm not prolific, I'm not one of the 1%, but please do drop by. Meanwhile, I'm quite happy to take any questions.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for that, Nicola, and I'm sure everyone has found that as interesting and as insightful as I have. We have got time for a few questions, so do keep those coming in. And so we've got a couple that have come in already. So we've got one from Stuart, who's saying that he works specifically with complaints, some of which do have regulatory implications. So he's saying that when service failure becomes a complaint, there can be regulations about how that is handled, which can sometimes stop their ability to use networked experts, as you've described, Nicola. So do you have any knowledge of how sort of businesses are getting around those sorts of problems?
Well, actually, I would argue that's an absolute prime example of how networked expertise can come in. And certainly, if you do get a complaint coming in, you probably do need to involve maybe networked experts in the legal and regulatory department. So it's a case of working together with them. Equally, I mean, one of the reasons in the finance sector why the sort of network expert model is emerging is that generally, if you're giving financial advice, you have to be qualified to do it. Therefore, if suddenly you get a specific question about something, you need to make sure that the networked expert you employ to talk to the customer actually does have completely appropriate qualifications and actually is aware of what the regulation is. So I would actually argue that networked expertise helps in a sort of heavily regulated environment.
Okay, fantastic. Well, there you go, Stuart. That's completely turned it on its head. Okay, great. So we've had a question from David, who has asked if you believe, Nicola, that it's feasible to operate an entirely cloud-based contact centre with no physical contact centre location at all. Do you see that in the future?
It's happening now. In fact, it's JetBlue in the US has never had a physical contact center. They're based around the Salt Lake City area. Obviously, they have a group headquarters, but no contact center advisors are based there. The sort of advice that we would give is if you do have, sure you can mix and match. You do get a different type of advisor typically in a physical contact center than you do maybe in a completely virtual and cloud-based one. The advantage of maybe having an environment you can bring them in occasionally for training, for certainly team contact. You can bring them into a physical location. That's what they do in JetBlue. Obviously, they use their headquarters as a sort of training hub. Some of the other things that we've been seeing and working with, so if you have a physical contact center, maybe draw a line around it and say, that's where we recruit from, but they're based from home for most of the time. Bring them in very occasionally. But with cloud, it doesn't matter. I mean, you've got a browser and a phone. You can be a contact center advisor pretty much anywhere you are. So you can do a mix and match if you want. It completely is dependent on your business model. And sometimes, I mean, if people are handling very, very, very sensitive information, certainly banks often want a locked door. You need to look at how the physical location for that. But even then, we've been looking at, could you create sort of little hubs of contact center advisors with controlled access, right? So rather than working from home, they could actually work in little hubs that maybe aren't major warehouses. Actually, we were looking at whether we could use some BT exchanges because there's a lot of them around. They haven't got as much equipment in as they used to. Could we actually start to use that as a locked building where you could actually get contact center advisors maybe dealing with more sensitive stuff, but you have access control on them? So it's happening now. We are seeing completely cloud-based contact centers emerging now as we speak.
Okay, well there you go. So the answer is an emphatic yes to that one. We've had a few people have sort of concerns, I guess, about completely sort of using remote workers, about what that means for kind of a team environment. So, for example, Nicola's asked how easy it would be to manage performance, productivity and development in a totally cloud-based call centre.
Well, I mean, in some senses, it's as easy as managing a physical one. So everyone is on the switch. You know when they're clocking on and clocking off. You know what they're talking about because you can listen in. You can manage performance in exactly the way that you would in a physical contact center in terms of the monitoring, control, measures, etc. Because they're all on the switch, so all the stats come up as routine. The more I guess the more lessons that we've learned is more around the sort of physical team-based piece. So if you're particularly working from home and you have a really nasty, abusive call, you do need a community of coping, I call it, behind you. And actually with home-based advisors in particular, things like instant messaging become incredibly valuable. So if they have something, a bad customer call, or they've got a problem that they can't solve, having their supervisor online, having some colleagues online actually as a backup so that they can actually contact them and discuss things, and even just being able to phone their supervisor. And, that kind of real simple stuff, just making sure there's someone there that can actually help them, is certainly part of that team environment. Bring them in occasionally. There's no crime against bringing them in, so they do actually see people occasionally. So all of those things, I think, are completely surmountable. It may be, I keep saying it's doing management well, so it's making sure you involve everybody, you brief everybody. Obviously things like audio calls, video conferencing, all that kind of thing can be brought in as well to keep that sort of team sort of stickiness together, and wherever they're working they feel part of that team. But technically it's completely doable because everyone is visible on the switch.
Fantastic. Okay, well, I'm afraid I think that's all we've got time for in this session. So a huge thank you to you, Nicola, for a great presentation, and to everyone for attending and participating. Don't forget, we've got one more live conference session this afternoon, and that's at 2 o'clock, when Osman and Paul from Protocol 1 will be offering some valuable hints and tips to help you solve the multi-channel riddle. But as Nicola mentioned, in the meantime, we're going to move over to the BT stand in the virtual exhibition, where Natasha and Emily will be on hand to take you on a tour of a cloud-based contact centre. So do please stay on for that. But thank you again, and I hope to see you at the next session.